Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today's video is something that has been requested for a while, and admittedly I did slack on. Lost Records Bloom & Rage is a recently released game by Don't Nod. If that name sounds familiar to you, that's because they are the original creators of Life is Strange and developed Life is Strange 2. Currently, Life is Strange is developed by Deck 9, and Square Enix basically handed over the reins to Life is Strange to them after Life is Strange 2 didn't really meet expectations, and Deck 9 had proved themselves through the development of Before the Storm. This video is specifically about Lost Records Bloom & Rage Tape 1. Tape 2, at the time of recording, has yet to release. That will be on April 15th, and I will be playing it as soon as it comes out and doing a follow-up review / deep dive as soon as possible. A lot of you wanted me to play the game, or at least comment on it back when the trailers were first coming out, and it's something that I didn't really look into until more recently. And that's my bad, because the game is pretty solid. What this video is going to be is a review and a deep dive into the story and into Tape 1, with some light speculation on what we will see in Tape 2. So without further ado, let's get into my review and deep dive of Lost Records Bloom & Rage. To start off, we'll begin with the visuals, the sounds, the gameplay, and they knock it out of the park here. The game has a very distinct style. It balances photorealistic characters with these sort of drawn photos similar to the first Life is Strange game, along with using cinematic and very ethereal, out there, almost similar to the lighting that you would see in a show like Euphoria. These elements blend together very, very well. The use of this sort of out there lighting, the use of purples, blues, reds, or even more grounded colors really elevate the nostalgia factor of the game, because a big chunk of it, as we all know, is set in 1995. There have been a lot of comparisons to Double Exposure in terms of Double Exposure trying to go photoreal and it ends up looking really odd and they don't really fully commit to it. That's something I'd have to look over again, but I do feel that this game does a great job of staying stylized while also providing what is a very realistic looking image and rendering. The music is, as usual with Don't Nod, outstanding. Whether it's the ambient soundtrack, the songs written by the girls in universe, or licensed music that plays in the background, all of it is just, it fits so well within the game. It enhances the mood of every scene. There's never a moment where I'm sitting there thinking that the music kind of takes me out of this scene. I feel that music has always been a staple of Don't Nod games, specifically Life is Strange. When I think of Life is Strange 1 and 2 to an extent, the soundtracks are what come to mind. The licensed music as well as the instrumental music. Both of those games have fantastic soundtracks, and this is no exception. Don't Nod has once again hit it out of the park with their music. Now we'll get into the environments within the game. The other thing with the music, I'm just going to insert some of my personal taste here. I think Destroy Boys, any of their songs would fit perfectly into these games, or really any sort of narrative game. I love their music, so Don't Nod, make that happen. I say as if I'm like some actual YouTuber with pull. Anyway. In terms of different maps and areas to explore within the game, there's really not that many, and most of them are fairly small, with the exception of the forest. However, they are extremely detailed. One of the great things about this game and the way you interact with the environment is that you can pick up objects directly and sort of rotate them around, zoom in and out, and you'll get different narration along with that. It's also a way to sort of solve puzzles. There's a puzzle in the cabin where one of the symbols needed for the padlock is underneath a can. This makes interacting with items more than just walking around a room, hitting X, getting a little narration, and then moving on. You really take in the detail of everything, and with these environments being smaller, it allowed the development team to really flesh them out. There are tons of objects that you can pick up with, you can interact with. It's really incredible and enhances the experience. It makes all of the environments feel super fleshed out and super lived in, because the ability to zoom into these items means that they need to account for every crack, every dent, every little icon, piece of text, and all of it is fleshed out. You can zoom in and read the back of almost every single movie in Swan's room. You can read the back of every single book. You can open them up and look at the tapes themselves and the movies. Really just the level of detail is insane to me. I spent the first like 30 minutes, I don't know, maybe longer, just looking around her room, interacting with items, opening things up. It was really something. I don't mean to keep going back to Life is Strange, however, it's difficult to, especially with the sort of state of that franchise. The way things are going, it doesn't exactly look good for that series. And for the original creators to put out a game for only $40 with no extra DLC crap, none of that, and have it at this level of detail, I mean, it's begging for comparison. I think the best phrase to use is that Double Exposure has a huge map. The campus is very large. Max's house is even very large. However, there isn't much interactability. The NPCs are sort of very stagnant in these areas. So a good way to put it is that Life is Strange Double Exposure is as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle. Whereas this game is quite the opposite. The scope itself is very small, but the amount of detail really makes up for it, because I wasn't thinking about, oh, we're back at the movieplex, oh, we're back in this one section again. I was thinking about what changed. Let me go look around. Oh, I missed this item. Let me pick it up. I cannot praise the environments enough. Locations like the bar, Nora's garage, the parking lot outside of the Blockbuster. I know it's not called a Blockbuster, but like the movie a rental place that Swan's going to, as well as Fawn's Rest, which is what I named their little cabin, are just so packed with detail. This same logic of a smaller amount that's heavily detailed also applies to the main character. The character's visual designs, as well as how they're written, has this same sort of care put into it. There's only really 4 main characters, but they are so detailed in their appearances, in the things they have with them, in their dialogue, the amount of interactions. Truly, it's incredible. I feel that each of the main cast gets an equal amount of attention. I don't feel that any of them are left out. The actors do a fantastic job of going between the sort of 1995 era where they're these young teenagers full of energy, awkwardness, all this stuff, and also transitioning to the present day where they are grown adult women. I also feel that having this smaller cast also really helps in terms of how you see your choices matter. The game is definitely a little linear, I would say. There's nothing huge that's going to change with your choices. However, that's not what they're going for. The thing that really matters in this game is your relationship with the other girls, how they view you. And having this tight-knit cast and having these very intimate moments, not these huge blockbuster action sections with all this crazy stuff going on, these intimate small moments where your dialogue is really what drives the scene, it makes all these choices matter more. And then you then see in return how these girls change, how the dialogue changes, how simple things like their attitude towards you when you walk up to them with the camera changes. Once again, just having this smaller cast means everything has much more weight to it. So to wrap that up, this smaller cast really helps make it feel fleshed out, make it feel like your choices really matter, even though I would say the game itself can be pretty linear. Another great thing about the visual design of these characters is something that's more of a problem in film, I would say, but I feel like it extends to all sorts of media. In a lot of movies, less so nowadays, but it's still a thing, you have these actors in their 30s playing high schoolers, and it feels jarring because you have these guys who are, way too tall, nobody's got acne, everybody looks perfect because they're all 20-somethings, 30-somethings playing these kids. The other thing is the behavior of the characters. A lot of these characters don't really act like teenagers. I can safely say that Lost Records does not have this problem. These characters feel like real teenagers. They have acne. They make all these horrible, cringy jokes. Their body language, the way they move. I know that's such a very vague thing, but if you look at an adult person and a kid, when I say kid, I mean like a teenager like them, the way they move, their energy is different. I think these actresses do a wonderful job of bringing that to their performances, but visually, the outfits they wear, I feel like these additions make them feel like real people, real teenagers. And then when you see them as adults and the contrasts and the way they've changed, it really makes them feel like well-rounded, realistic people. And once again on the acne, that's something you really don't see in a lot of movies. They don't really take the time to, in film, put makeup on the actors to make it look like they have acne, or in video games take the time to make that detail. But they do in this one, and God knows I had my fair share of horrible acne when I was a teenager. So that is something that I just feel is very real. And also having these different body types. Different characters, they look different from each other. No one girl is exactly like the other, and that's realistic to what being a teen is. I was a late bloomer. I knew other people who were 6'4" and, in freshman year of high school. Another thing that goes along with the sheer amount of detail within this game is the way that collectibles work. With the collectibles, it's typically, in most games, it's typically, oh, let me pick up an item. You picked up 15 squirrel statues, you get an achievement. Very basic stuff. But in this game, it really takes it to another level. It feels like an evolution of Life is Strange. Swan is a film nerd, and she carries around this camera with her everywhere, and what's really neat is you get to see through the perspective of that camera, and that is how collectibles work. She's putting together a memoir. So if you see a squirrel doing something, you can record that with your camera, and you look around, take videos of the girls, and then the best part is, it saves those videos and you can put them together as the memoir in the menu. I think that's such a wonderful way to really make it feel like you are in the shoes of Swan. It really helps you connect with her as a character because you get to see things through her eyes. You get to see what pops out at her as interesting. I feel like it really feeds into the story and just helps to elevate the characters. In a lot of games, the collectibles are something you have to go out of the way for, but it feels natural for Swan to just pull out her camera and wander around and be like, oh, what's that? Oh, that thing's cool over there. It feels very natural. The game is set in a small town in Michigan, and I think that's a fantastic choice. I feel like a lot of games and movies use the Pacific Northwest as a setting because of, you're right on the ocean, but it's still woodsy and it's misty and mysterious. But I feel like it's really overused. And I think getting some representation for the different kinds of small towns and places around the United States in games like these that are about growing up and things that everyone can relate to, I think that's very important. Because I feel like there's a big difference between East Coast small town, West Coast small town, Midwest small town, even the South, that kind of thing. I think they all have very different feelings to them. I think this game captures the feeling of a Midwest area very, very well. In the adult section of the game, in the present day, you play in first person. And at first it was very jarring. I'm not really used to that in these sort of narrative type games. I'm not used to that first person kind of style. However, I felt it was actually a really great choice. It made these conversations where you're getting to know these old friends again, you're trying to reconnect, you're trying to figure out what's going on, what the mystery is. It made them feel a lot more intimate. And you find yourself looking at the smaller details of these characters, the rings that they have on, the clothing, the stuff on their key ring. It's very, very intimate, and I think it's perfect for these scenes. Next, we're going to look at the characters sort of more in detail. We'll break them down one by one. First, we'll start with Swan. Swan is a fantastic choice to be the protagonist of this game. She's likable, she's empathetic, her love of film is something very relatable to me as someone who is in school for screenwriting, and someone who grew up making short films, running around with a camera just like her. I think the amount of world building about her from just within the room alone is fantastic and very, very well done. I already harped on how wonderful the environments are, but the choices, the things that they chose to put in her room and make interactable, I think says a lot about her character right off the bat. So there's various movies and movie cases that you can pick up and read. So you can read specifically what this movie is about that she really likes. Also, there's a reference to Life is Strange. One of them is called Vortex Club. I thought that was a little neat. The other thing is she has an X-Files poster on her ceiling. The other thing related to X-Files is that she has a huge crush on Scully. You can find in her secret stash a fan fiction she wrote about Scully. And I think it's the choice to have these sort of little things that, those embarrassing things that in our rooms that I'm sure many of us can relate to. Maybe not a Scully fan fiction underneath our bed, but something like that. Everybody has those little things in the room that they're embarrassed that they would hide away, or things that they stole that are important to them, or items that would appear meaningless to others but are very important to them. You get the choice to choose different outfits for her each day. I think for these outfits, something that's a little overlooked is I feel it's sort of something that you can look at as how you want to play her. Whether she is the overactive imagination, whether she is shy and timid and practical, or if she's trying desperately to be edgy but really isn't. I think having those different variations is very intentional, and I think it's a great choice. As for the adult version of the character, once again, I think the voice actress does a wonderful job of portraying both versions. There were one or two moments where I think it might have been her internal monologue, or maybe she was just shy, but there was one moment in particular where I was like, she sounds exactly like her younger self now. Not in terms of like, oh yeah, haha, it's the same voice actress, but I mean the tone, and like it felt very intentional. It just kind of took me out of it for a second. As the game continues, obviously you make a lot of choices for Swan. So my Swan acts differently than yours, and I think, she would do this, and you might disagree with me on that. However, I feel all of the paths you can go all keep her endearing. No matter what the individual playthrough, I think we can all agree that she's great. I think the mixture of her shyness / overeagerness is very well done, and it feels very real. She feels like many of us felt at her age, alone and eager for friends, so she really feels compatible with all of the girls. Next is Autumn. Autumn is the first character we see return as an adult, and immediately there is tension. Not negative tension, but almost that sort of nervousness of when you meet an old friend, and I think they got that sort of vibe, that sort of tone down very, very well. I think once again the performance given by her actress is fantastic, and I think she hits the sweet spot between the tension of past lovers as well as the tension of just an old friend very, very well. Because depending on your path, you could become something more with her, so they need to sort of keep that up in the air. However, I think with how close all of these girls were, they were all very, very good friends. So having that sort of next level of tension that you might confuse for romantic makes sense because they had such a tight bond. Autumn has a very interesting background. She's a self-proclaimed military brat, which basically means her and her family move around with her father's military service. She also says during the story that her family is one of the only black families in the town. And this makes her home life, both of these things combined, being in a military family as well as being the only black family in this community, makes her home life consist of needing to be perfect and practical, and this extends to how she interacts with her friends. Between being a model minority and the daughter of someone in the military, there's a lot of pressure on her to be smart and be good. This is also where the biggest problem with her character lies. Not a problem in terms of she's poorly written or that I have an issue with the way she's written. I mean a problem in terms of a character flaw. She's practical to a fault. Even when faced with something fantastical, she simply cannot accept it. Like when they find the abyss, the next day she mentions that she was at the library searching for proof that there was a sinkhole there. The other issue is that for the player to get close to her, it requires Swan to also be like that, which makes sense to have Swan be this sort of skeptic, more realist person, depending on the route you want to go. I just personally think that that's not as fun. Autumn as an adult is a social worker, and this makes a lot of sense as she says she wants to help others in her little personal interview thing. The other interesting thing is she's the first example of how we see that these characters have grown from when they were kids to versus now when they're adults. She's putting herself out there more. While she is still a very practical person, she mentions trying new things such as dating a woman, or getting annoyed at Nora when Nora becomes avoidant when talking about the package that they're all there to discuss. Which, speaking of Nora, now it's her turn. Nora is a character that, when I first started playing, I thought she was going to be our Chloe Price. She's loud, she has short hair, she's a shit talker, and at first she alludes to having a bad home life, and even her own step douche. However, that's pretty far from the actual case. Nora is very interesting because I feel like she's a great example of how you can introduce character flaws to a character without making them insufferable. Nora, like I said, is a bit of an avoidant. She doesn't like conflict and would rather just screw around and try to avoid the consequence. She's also the biggest scaredy cat of the group, which I think is hilarious. She has this tough exterior, the dyed hair, she's like cursing all the time, and then she's like super skittish. I think that's such a great encapsulation of her. We also learned that her home life isn't as bad as we once thought. The reason I initially thought it was bad, and I wrote this down in my initial notes for my playthrough, was that she mentions that, oh, no one cares that we're in the garage, and oh, it kind of smells like weed. My first thought was going to be that her parents were sort of absent. I feel like an interesting thing that we see in real life that hasn't really been replicated in movies is that sometimes as kids, we don't realize that the parents who let their kids do whatever they want, they don't care how late they stay out, they let them try whatever, sometimes aren't great parents. And that they're actually kind of neglectful. But as kids, we're like, oh, that's so cool. Brian's mom lets him do ba 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 in the house, and they don't care how late we're out. Oh, I hate my mom for making me go to bed at a certain time, you know. I thought we were going to go that route with it, but she mentions when they first make the music video that her parents would want to watch. And then she mentions that there has been a divorce and she doesn't like her stepmom, things like that. Her chemistry with Swan, and even Kat to an extent, is undeniable. Nora retroactively admits that she was a ball of hormones throwing herself at everything. For adult Nora, we don't spend as much time with her as we do with Autumn, as she shows up a little later into the tape. However, she shows that she has grown and she admits things she's done wrong. However, she still at her core, just like Autumn, has those flaws of being avoidant, of not really wanting to directly conflict with something, because she's constantly trying to drive the conversation away from what the matter at hand is. And finally, we have Kat, who I think is, number one, the most compatible with Swan in terms of a romantic interest, but also the most interesting character of the bunch. She has this sort of fight and drive that Swan is trying to find, while also having the sort of fantastic, unserious same interests as her, such as the paranormal. At first, Kat sort of fell by the wayside for me. I thought that the game was pushing for more of an Autumn/Nora love triangle situation. However, my opinion changed drastically throughout the game. We slowly learned more and more about Kat and her home life through meeting her sister and her sister's horrible, creepy boyfriend, Corey. Kat longs for an escape through reality because of the strained relationship with that sister, as well as the fact that she lives on a ranch but hates hunting. She tells this very well done, well written story about how she saved a fawn and she wanted to always protect it because it wasn't fair for it to die and she wasn't going to let it happen. She finds this escape through punk music as well as hanging out with her friends, Nora and Autumn. This really contradicts her visual design, as I would say that she is the most quote-unquote innocent looking of the group. She's clearly a late bloomer, she's the shortest, she has the highest pitched voice, and all of that also factors into her character. It leads to her being this very angry person as well. And that's different than feisty, I want to clarify. She has moments of snarkiness, but I'm talking about genuine anger that has built up because of the situation that she's in. This comes to life in a few ways, whether it's the knife game or her research into witches that eventually leads to the use of the abyss, or even writing a curse before even really knowing that they're sitting in a magical spot. The reveal at the end of the first tape of her having leukemia also adds to this. She's so frustrated. Her time is limited, and on top of that, she's trapped in this situation with all these people who wrong her, and she just feels sort of, I guess, inadequate. She doesn't feel powerful compared to these other people, even these other girls in her friend group. And I think that gives her plenty of reasons to be angry at the world. And I think that's why she's the most interesting character. Over the course of this game, watching her sort of unravel, learning more and more about her situation, why she was the way she was, it was really, really compelling. Finally, we will get into the story a little bit. This is still technically part of my review. Then we will get to my little rating and some of the other issues I had, and then we'll end this off with theories. The story is two parts, as I said, modern day and the summer of '95. Both are equally compelling, and I think they feed into each other very organically. The things you say in both the past and the present affect each other. You can start a conversation in the future, and that changes something in the past the next time he plays, and vice versa. Whether it's saying no to a beer, which leads to Noer bringing you a soda, or successfully getting Autumn's keys, and she ends up keeping one of the bits of it on her current keychain as a keepsake, there's plenty of little details that carry over. Basically, the inciting incident is that Nora received this package that's labeled For Bloomin' Rage, which is their band. And something happened in the summer of '95 that they've all agreed to not talk about. Whatever it was split the group, fractured them, and so this is like a big deal, like who the heck else knows about this thing? It's a mixture of things, lost memories being uncovered, and just simply being uncomfortable talking about the past, and I think it works very well in terms of how it relays information to the player. Here's the other big thing about a story, and I want to start with a little disclaimer. I'm a cisgendered guy. I have never been, and will never be, a teenage girl. However, I did grow up in a very conservative area of the United States as a bisexual person. And so that's why I feel grounded and I feel okay saying what I'm about to say. I think the game captures the quirks, the intricacies, the cringe, the shame, everything. I feel that it's captured so well. The hormones, the tension with your friends, not knowing if they like you back or if they're just a friend, or even the first realization of, hey, for some reason, I really want this person to be my friend, and not realizing that you have a crush on them. And all of this is elevated by being set in the 90s, when things weren't as acceptable. And the other aspect is the game doesn't shy away from the fact that these are teenage girls. You can find pads in Swan's room. The adult versions of the characters give some narration regarding that, and I'm sure it's a conversation that some of you have had with your moms, I guess. There's discussion of like basic stuff with puberty, talking about how there's a small bit where Swan mentions that she stole this sort of racy kind of underwear because she wanted to feel attractive. And once again, I mentioned with Kat, her being a late bloomer, that's something that personally I can understand. I was absolutely a late bloomer. I was always the smallest, shortest kid. I didn't get my chest hairs until later, as some older guys would say. But that sort of helps me understand some of the anger that Kat has, that frustration there. And I think for the group as a whole, I kind of mentioned this, body image as well as self-confidence plays a huge role in the story and also the motivations of the character. Swan is a plus-size character. She's heavyset. And having her be the main character is something we haven't really seen in a lot of games recently. And they handle it very well, in my opinion. I think her narration is very accurate. They don't make her obsessed with being skinny and all this stuff. She just wants to feel attractive and accepted and loved in her body. And I think that's something everybody can feel, no matter what your weight or height or whatever. Acceptance and empowerment is really one of the main pillars of this story. And the neat thing is they find it within this group that they form, because everyone's a little different, everybody has their own insecurities. I think that's a very real thing and a universal experience, whether you are just whether you're a straight teenager, a gay teenager, a girl, a guy, whatever it is. I think having those insecurities and finding a group of people who understand you, or at least trying to, is a universal experience. And I think this game captures that and the intricacies of the specific kind of characters we're dealing with very, very well. Each of the girls can become something more for Swan. However, that's not really the point of the game, but I feel like finding love as a teenager, having crushes that either go nowhere or, lead to your first kiss, or, you do stupid things for your crushes, I think that's a huge part of growing up and maturing. The game presents many different opportunities to get to know the girls, and at first I felt like Kat was a little left behind. However, I think I just simply overlooked her as a character. But I think that was intentional, because she's meant to be overlooked as the shortest, as a late bloomer, as someone who doesn't really have much agency in her own life. It's only natural for you to sort of not really pay attention to her and go to, hey, who's this interesting loudmouth girl, or who's this really smart one with the, that kind of thing. As I said before, the consequences for your choices don't come in huge alterations to the plot. However, smaller things like dialogue from both the past and the present change heavily. That's not to say there aren't many different paths to go down, it's just that these paths sort of lead to the same spot. The Truth or Dare section in the cabin is a primary example. The different dares, the different things that they've animated for all these different variations of who you ask, whether it's truth or dare, and then you pick from the 3 options. It's really something, and I think that's something that makes me really want to replay this game again and again and again. Some symbolism within the story is obviously the allusion to witches. I feel that the sort of Bloomin' Rage band becomes the next generation, the modern iteration of a witches' coven. Because if you look at the basics of what witchcraft and what evidence of witchcraft used to be, it's girls dancing around in the woods, singing songs, that kind of thing. And that's exactly what they do, and that's what leads them to finding this cabin with these strange sigils and these weird markings on trees. I mean, they even make a blood pact to seal a curse. Next, we're going to get into some symbolism within the game. Swan's room is covered in books and films related to the supernatural, as well as witches. Not to mention, when they discover the cabin, there's glowing symbols everywhere, and that's really when the supernatural stuff starts to happen. Also, if you play the Bloody Mary game and see it all the way through, you end up seeing a figure appear. When you first enter the cabin, the instructions to how to unlock the door just fly to the wall and are suddenly pinned there. Not to mention the literal giant glowing pit that when you give it something, it does something for you. I think the Abyss itself is very interesting. It feels very Lovecraftian, in the sense that it's a being that we can't really comprehend or fully understand, but these people are giving it things, and it leads to things happening for these people. It has power to reach out from beyond this pit and affect them in their day-to-day lives. I feel like it immediately begins to empower them, beyond the wishes that they make. When they're standing up to Corey the day after finding it, each of them get a flash of purple in their eyes, representing that the magic is giving them this boldness, this confidence. I think the overall core of the game is that obviously part 2 is not out yet, so I can't really say what the full lesson and that kind of thing, the symbolism is really in the game. I think that the core of the game is about growing up, finding confidence, and finding the ability to make choices for yourself, to be independent. Each of the girls has something that they need to be independent from. However, I think it's also showing the dark side of what happens with your overconfidence if you let your frustration with the world take over, and how that can lead you to do things that aren't great. For example, Kat pushing herself too far, leading to her nosebleed and her collapsing. I think the overall core is, like I said, it's about the sort of overconfidence, what happens when you have too much power and you don't sort of recognize the balance of life. Finally, we're going to get into my sort of complaints about the game, and then we're going to get into some theories. My complaints are pretty few and far between. The lip syncing is super janky, which is odd because of how well acted and well animated all the scenes are. The game also crashed more than once during my playthrough, which is very frustrating because it has an autosave system, so there were times that I had to redo big sections. And I'm really torn on the dialogue system. It feels like a cross between OG Life is Strange as well as Oxenfree. Oxenfree having these sort of conversations that flow very naturally because the options, you only have a certain amount of time to say it, that kind of thing. However, I think it feels like it wants to do both, because there are multiple times where if you sit there and wait, more options show up, and sometimes the amount of time that goes, the amount of time it takes for something to fully disappear, it changes rapidly. So I'm used to clicking super fast, but there's scenes like when Kat is doing your makeup, or whoever you have the highest affinity with, if you sit there and wait, you will eventually get the opportunity to say that you have feelings for her. However, I didn't know that because I didn't know that I had to sit there and wait. I thought that, I'm going to run out of time to say something, so I just clicked whatever option I did. And that's a little frustrating. The other thing is, I don't know if it's my own anxiety or what, but I feel like the amount of notifications you get about she didn't like this thing, she liked this thing, it almost makes me a little anxious. Finally, I think I'd give this game currently a tentative 8 out of 10 so far. I really enjoy it and I really recommend it. So let's get on to our theories now. So I think it's safe to say that witches definitely once lived in that cabin. There's glowing sigils, there's hidden symbols in the trees like the eyes, there's the circle of mushrooms, and like I said, I think that Bloomin' Rage is meant to be a modern incarnation of a witch's coven. And like I said, I think magic represents the process of growing up and gaining confidence through maturing. So, first question.
Oh, you were the box. What was in the box?
Because I envy your normal life.
Put the gun down, David.
It seems that envy is my sin.
Oh, what's in the box? Not till you give me the What's in the fucking box?
What is in the box? My personal theory is that Swan's tapes are what's in the box. Swan doesn't have the camera as an adult. And the other important detail is Swan, along with all the other adults, have very fleeting memories when it comes to the summer, despite the fact that Swan has all these tapes and all these videos of what happened. So you'd think she would be able to refresh her memory. This kind of feeds into what I think the climax is going to be. I think that it's going to be Kat merging with the Abyss, or sacrificing herself to the Abyss. And for some reason, Swan's camera is going to be involved. And so whether she uses it as a sacrifice to try and save her, or try and fix things, get them back to normal, or if it's just lost in the chaos, it's going to get lost in that event, and that's going to explain how these tapes would end up resurfacing. This one's a little more vague, but I think the climax of the game is really going to come down to your relationship with all the girls. Who likes you the most? Who are you the closest with? I think it's really going to affect the ending, because the sheer amount of notifications about like, hey, she hated this, hey, she liked this, is kind of crazy. Well, this is a longer video than normal, so I appreciate every single one of you checking in. I appreciate you all, and I'm so excited to continue playing this game when it comes out on April 15th. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and have a good morning or evening or whatever.
Bunker.
That was a bigger bite than I thought it would be.